And I see that we are live. Thank you, Monica. All right, good morning, everybody. So sorry we're getting started about 5 minutes late here. Had some technical difficulties, but this is why I love having a younger, more tech-savvy team because Monica figured it out. So thank you, Monica. And good morning, everybody, to come in live here with us at 8 a.m. bright and early in the morning. So I'm going to get started by sharing my screen here. Giving everybody a little bit of an overview that may not be familiar with our organization. And everybody can see my screen, right? Right, perfect. All right, so Tech Hub South Florida. We are a tech nonprofit, and this morning we have a community coffee, which we do every other Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. We alternate them actually with our podcasts. And this morning we have a very special topic, which is intersectionality of underrepresentation in tech. If you can say that 10 times fast, I can't even say it once. So intersectionality of underrepresentation in tech. So I'm sorry. So our panelists this morning are Dani Dominguez, Equity and Inclusion Specialist at the Yes Institute. We did have Kyle from, he's the ecosystem builder, Aire Ventures, but he did actually have a last minute emergency. So we're gonna wish him well and hopefully him and his family are doing okay. Eric Gavin, we do have this morning, the Senior Program Manager at the Center for Black Innovation. And then Mark McGuire, Deaf Accessibility and Inclusion Specialist at the WAG Group. And we do have a couple of ASL interpreters here with us this morning. So thank you again, the WAG Group, Beth and Tammy, for doing that as well. Our sponsor for the morning is South Florida Business and Wealth. I don't know again if we've got Mark on with us this morning, but Mark, if you are here with us, please just give me a shout and I would be happy to give you a moment here to speak as well. And our mission statement, building South Florida's tech hub. So in building our tech hub, this is a little of our community creed. Tech Hub South Florida is wholeheartedly committed to building a welcoming, collaborative, and inclusive community for all. We put inclusivity first, engage with others, are considerate to all, and don't sell to people. So again, in short, we want everybody to feel welcome to the table, no matter your background, color, race, disability, whatever it may be. We want to make sure that you are involved. So we are, again, a 501c6 nonprofit organization. We are membership driven. We've got both individual and corporate memberships. Right now, we've got about over 200, I think we're about 215 or so corporate members from Miami-Dade to Palm Beach County, and even a few trickled into Martin County as well. Just a few of our members, Office Depot, Boca Code, I know they're here on with us this morning, Social Mobile, Carrier, Brick, Cloud Adhesive, we've got a ton of them, both from small startup companies all the way to your larger enterprise, and of course, everybody in between. Won't go into detail here, but a little bit about our memberships. We do have opportunities like this for speaking opportunities, job listings, different member spotlights throughout the year, and a bunch of other great benefits. So if somebody is interested in membership, please reach out to Monica or myself. Easily just email is our first names at techhubsouthflorida.org. A little bit about our events every week. On average, we've got about 3 to 5 events in an average week, so there's more than enough things to get involved in. Our tech talks we do each Monday night. We are starting to get those back in person. So the last couple months we have been doing them. We actually moved them around from West Palm Beach, then to Boca, Fort Lauderdale, and then Miami. So no matter where you live, we should have one that's coming up close to you. Again, our community coffees, like this morning, are alternating Tuesday mornings at 8 a.m. They alternate with our podcasts, also Tuesdays at 8 a.m. And then our lunch and learns, which are introductory workshops, Fridays from 12 to 1. For anybody that's looking for a job, if you go to our website, techhubsouthflorida.org, there's a button there that says talent. If you click on that, there is a job board. If for some reason you're looking through the jobs and you don't find the perfect opportunity for you in that moment, you can actually create a profile, upload your resume, and once you hit submit, it automatically gets pushed out to all of our members and companies that have signed up to receive that service. And last but not least, we do have a very active Slack channel with, I think, over 4,500 members right now. It's techhubsouthflorida.org/Slack. And if you want to be added to our e-newsletters that go out every Monday afternoon, you can actually just text us your email to 561-250-7206. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And I'd love to get started. One, I want to thank Beth and Tammy again for the ASL interpretation. With this being a discussion on just inclusivity, we do this anyway every Tuesday morning. We always have ASL interpreters, but it's very important for me, at least, to just to highlight that and make sure that people know how inclusive we're trying to be. And if anybody has any ideas for us, wants to educate us in any way, we are totally welcome to people that like to reach out. We are currently forming an inclusion committee. So if anybody has any experience with that background, I would love to have you reach out and help us with that. So to get started here, I'm just going to kind of pick on whoever's first on my screen. If each of the panelists could just tell us your name, where you're from, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get started with the Q&A. So the first person I've got on my screen here is Mark.
Hello, hello, good morning. Thank you for including me. This is a wonderful panel discussion. I'm excited. So the topic today is very important because everyone can benefit. Individuals, everybody can benefit. So my name is Mark, and my role is I'm a deaf accessibility inclusion specialist. My involvement with WAG is that we do design development and inclusion for solutions for digital accessibility, all of the needs that people might have. And I've been working with Beth, advising businesses, organizations on how to make their events more deaf friendly. So thanks. Yep, next.
Thank you, Mark. And I've got next on my screen, Eric.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see everyone. My name is Eric Gavin. I'm Senior Program Manager at the Center for Black Innovation. I'm originally from Chicago. I've been down here in Miami for about 6 years now. So it's been great. I've been meeting tons of people kind of throughout different parts of the community. Originally, I was in the design community. Shout out to Marcelo and a couple other people that are here and have transitioned kind of more into these ecosystem builders and types of roles in the community. I'm just excited to be here and talk more kind of about diversity, equity, inclusion, and specifically how that plays a role in South Florida and how we're growing as an ecosystem more generally. Thank you all.
Thank you, Eric, as well. And last but not least, I've got Dani.
Hi, everyone. Good morning and happy Pride. Happy Pride Month. My name is Dani. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the Equity and Inclusion Specialist at Yes Institute. I'm originally from San Diego, California, and I have been in Miami for a couple of years now. So I'm excited for this conversation and grateful to be sharing space with everybody. So thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everybody. And again, just to make sure that the panelists know and the audience as well. So I will address each question to one of you. And I'm going to actually take Kyle's questions and just throw them out as an all question. So anybody that would like to answer, just to make sure that we do discuss those. But if any of the panelists would like to answer a question that somebody else was given, please feel free to add your input and insight there. I definitely want this to be open and a back and forth conversation. All right, so to get us started here, Dani, can you help open up the conversation just by explaining what the word intersectionality actually means and maybe give us an example?
Sure. I think in the most basic way, intersectionality refers to the fact that we all have multiple identities that intersect or interconnect to make us who we are. And understanding and realizing that we aren't single identity people, meaning we don't live single issued kind of lives. For example, I'm Mexican, but I'm not only Mexican, I'm also non-binary, I'm also visibly queer. I'm also someone whose parents immigrated to the United States. So intersectionality is really the acknowledgement that I'm all of those things simultaneously. And it's also recognizing how my identities sort of interplay, or our identities, right, interplay with how we see ourselves, how we see and relate to other people. And really without an intersectional lens in diversity, equity, and inclusion sort of work, when we're trying to address or solve issues of inequities towards one group, if we're not having that sort of intersectional lens, we may be actually sustaining and perpetuating systems of inequities towards other groups. So that's sort of like, in a nutshell, how this pertains to this work. And it's I think it's also something that we're starting to see and hear about even more now today. And I'd be open for anybody else who wants to add to that.
Perfect. Thank you. That was a very good description of that, Dani. So I appreciate it, because I'm sure there were some people that didn't even know what that meant. So Eric, my next question is for you. So how do social identities overlap with one another and create further oppressions in an environment where we already have impressions, but siloed ones? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a loaded question, right?
I know it is.
There's a lot of things that we need to consider when we're talking about different layers or intersectionality when people are talking about their identity. So Dani kind of pointed out one really important part. So how you kind of present yourself when you're in certain environments can adjust or change how people kind of react and correspond or conversate with you. So if I'm a Black man in a certain situation, this to give us a simple example, I can't expect that a Black woman is going to have the exact same experience, response, or type of working environment that I'm going to have just because we're both Black, right? There's different things that need to be taken into consideration, primarily there, her being a woman. And we haven't even gotten into whether somebody's sexual orientation comes into play and whether or not that starts to create a different lens or perspective, as Dani was saying, when these things start to come into play. So I think the biggest thing to consider, because when we start talking about different identities, a lot of colleagues or people that I know, when we have this conversation, like, it's a lot. There's so much that I have to remember or have to take in. And it's not that you need to memorize what people are or try to sit there and be an academic about all of these things. It's just about being conscious about how you approach situations and being and reflecting on how people are going to present themselves to you so that you can create an inclusive environment. So we're going to build on that over time. And I think that's kind of the best way to give a foundational answer. But when we're talking about intersectionality and how these either play into privileges or play into oppression, we have to start to have open conversations so that we can see how people's experiences are going to change that. And that's the best way to approach that, instead of saying, oh, that person's a man and such, they're going to feel a certain type of way. Well, ask them, talk to them, understand where they're coming from, and then learn how those play together so that they can have an open conversation with you. It starts to open up in that. And we can do that at work in a professional way that's not, this like gut-wrenching type of conversation. We can be professional about it and still have a regular working relationship.
Yeah, I appreciate that too, Eric, because I think that when it comes to these conversations, they are hard conversations, but I think just being open-minded about them and educating yourself, which is, what we're trying to do this morning, because I know, when I was having a conversation even with you and with Dani previous to this panel, was that I'm learning myself a lot through this. So I think it's really just being open-minded and knowing that you don't know everything, so I do appreciate that too. So my next question here, I'm going to ask this for you, Mark, is can you explain how maybe religious and cultural customs play a role in acceptance or the lack of within a specific community?
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to share my experience. So it's more specific to myself growing up. For example, when I grew up and I would go, I was very accepted by my community, but as a deaf person myself, I use sign language or I use captions. Well, I really use both actually, but my church didn't have an interpreter or any type of captions. So really, I would go to church and I would sit with my family and I'd just look around. I would look at the ceilings and I would just have my own imagination. I didn't really copy anything from anybody because I didn't know what they were, discussing. So when I was growing up, and then I became older, I decided for myself that I needed to break these barriers and study different religions and different philosophies of sort. Um, so I recognize that, hang on one second, um, that, you know, I did to be open-minded, and I had to go through different beliefs in order to see that not, you know, they don't all fit, right? When not one person themselves just fits in everyone has right to believe whatever they choose, and they believe what they want. So if you can be open again, you know, then be able to accept other beliefs, but feel more included. But if anybody else wants to add to that discussion?
Sure, I'd like to add and really expand on what you're sharing, because I think it's critical to this kind of work. Is that often there's a sense that we must let go of our religious or cultural beliefs in order to be open-minded, or to affirm and respect people's identities and experiences and backgrounds. And you know, this is something that's true not only in my personal life, but really that we've honed in, you know, at Yes Institute, is really being able to bridge these conversations and bring all types of people from all backgrounds into the conversation. And when you're trying to build out systems that are going to reduce or mitigate bias and marginalization, you need to have everybody on board, right? So how do we do that in a way that honors who people are and meets people where they're at? So I think that oftentimes when people hear religion or faith, and I used to be one of those people, it was an immediate reaction based on what I was taught and my experiences as a young queer person and the messages that I received about what it meant to be a person of faith. And it wasn't until, and Eric, I think you mentioned this, you listen to people and you get to know people and you bring them to the table and you start to really peel back the layers and you get to know who people are authentically, and you get to know and you get freed up on the fact that people aren't against you. And just because people have divergent points of views doesn't mean people are out to get you. It's really about how do we then do this work and bring people together. So I just wanted to expand on that because I thought that was a really great point.
Yeah, I love that too. Eric, did you have anything that you wanted to add there?
I think the only thing that I add, it brought up to mind a hard question that we get asked. So the Center for Black Innovation, why do you guys just focus on Black people, right? So like I've been asked that question, and it's not a question, it's a question that, you know, somebody can get really easily upset at, like, why, you know, why do we only focus on Black people? Why are you even asking me this question? And I try to remind everybody, my staff included, that the question is not always being, sometimes it's malicious, you know, but it's not always malicious. Most of the time it's not. The majority of the time, like 99% of the time, it's not malicious. And when somebody asks that question, it's because they genuinely want to understand why do Black people need a focus from an organization based on the work that we're trying to do? Why is that a point of concern? Do Black people have special concerns or issues that need focused on? And we do, like, this flat out, like, we can talk about systematic oppression and everything else that deals with that, other groups that deal with that as well. But flat out, we have an approach and a belief that this is the best way in order to solve those problems directly instead of indirectly. And that does not invalidate anybody else's opinions. It doesn't invalidate anybody else's approach, but as a not-for-profit, that's our approach. And so having those open conversations with people lets people understand this is not an objective, flat out, like, way to do what you do. I think people should go and create organizations and businesses that align with the things that they want to affect. And that's what we have done kind of in our organization. So, you know, when we have that conversation, when we go about creating the things that we want to create, we have to be open to the idea that people are not going to fully understand where we're coming from perspective-wise, just like any business. And given that that's the case, how do we have that conversation in an open space, in a safe way, that people don't feel immediately adverse to it and feel like it's, you know, because you don't understand me, you don't like me. Like it's really easy to get to that point. So I think that's where my mind went. And it's easy to get into that mode, but I want to encourage open conversations around those things because it's important. And I love giving people understanding about that because it helps people say, I want to help you. I didn't know about that. I didn't understand that in that way. I want to help you now. So.
That's awesome. Yeah. And you guys are doing some great work there too. And I think just as you were talking, Eric, I mean, it makes me think with everything that all of you had said is that a lot of times people too even put just quote unquote Black people in a box. There's so many people that are mixed racially, and even like, I'm thinking of like just my family, there's, Black Latinos, and like it's people, I think, put so many people in a box that I think that so many of us kind of hit what you were saying, Dani, so many different boxes even within one group, which is totally what this discussion is about. So I appreciate both of your comments there too. This next question, again, I'm going to ask this of Mark, is how do our identities affect how we perceive the world and maybe how the world perceives us? What are some of those already kind of unconscious biases that may be there?
Wow. That's a pretty deep question. I think we might have to have some strong coffee, or maybe we need to add some Baileys to our coffee this morning for this question. That will help. But the truth is that there's no simple answer, universal answer for this, because we have our own culture and our own identities and personalities, and that will affect how we perceive the world. For example, especially it's important with tech industry, where we have experienced different bias with design and developing solutions. An easy way to answer this is to explain really an example of the word disability. Some people view it as a medical problem. Some people view it as a cultural problem. And some people view it as a social problem. Some people don't even view disabilities as an identity. So to help you understand and put things in perspective, I want to be able to demonstrate how the world perceives each other. So for the word disability, for experience number one, if we happen to put a deaf person in a room full of hearing people who can talk, and deaf people are signing, then who has the disability? That's one perspective. So now if we flip the script here, we'll notice that if, in example number two, if we put a hearing person who does not sign in a room full of deaf people who do sign, then who has a disability? So we see different experiences here, right? And individuals who are put into different rooms, they both experience being disabled at that moment in their own way. Maybe not that people are looking down at somebody because of the disability. I don't necessarily mean that, but so you have to realize that I brought this perspective because deaf community itself does not really view themselves or feel like they're disabled. They really view themselves more as a cultural identity that we could sign, that has we communicate, sign that we have a foundation for communication. So I feel like it's a challenge to answer that question fully, but the basic of how we label ourselves versus how we identify with ourselves. You know, maybe that's, I'm not really sure if it's answering exactly, but I know for sure that whatever, you know, if you're 20 or 40 or you're 60 years old, we're always learning new things. And so every time we learn something new, we challenge ourselves and our own assumptions with our own cultural identity and personalities. So I think that, again, you know, it's a tough question. But if anyone else wants to join from the panel to help with that, expand, that's just my point of view.
I appreciate that, Mark, too, your insight into that, because just as you were giving some comparisons, I was thinking when you're asking who has the disability immediately, because we get that a lot in the Hispanic community where people look down upon people that may have an accent or, you know, speak in a different way, but really who has the disability? We can speak two languages type of question. So that kind of made me think of that also as with you being able to sign. So I don't know, I think it's really cool to put it in a just different perspective as well. Dani and Eric, did you guys have anything that you would like to add to that?
Yeah, just I feel like this is,
I know these are all hard questions.
We can have a whole other conversation just on this. I think the only thing that I like to bring in is like, how does this then translate into how we're rolling out initiatives, right, on our efforts to be more inclusive and equitable. And I think having that understanding that our identities are shaping and are pretty much the filter in how we're interacting with others and ourselves, how we're contextualizing like current events. You know, as someone who is Latinx, as someone who, you know, parent is an immigrant, like how I hold certain conversations around immigration might be different than somebody else, right? And so all of that is constantly at play when we're building out policies. When we're having a Zoom and we decide whether we're going to have ASL interpretation or closed captioning, or Spanish or Haitian Creole interpretation translation as well, right? Given we're in South Florida, so I think these are the different types of thoughts that we can have as we're building out, and in our efforts to look at how does intersectionality of identities and how do our lived experiences then translate into this work. And I think that is being aware of, I know that I'm going to hold affinity bias, right, for people who are queer, for people who, and that's my automatic thought is like, ooh, community, like I'm here for it. But that doesn't mean anything. And so it's recognizing that just because there's also someone that has, you assume has a shared identity, doesn't mean that they're going to be on the same wavelength, that they're going to think like you. It doesn't, right? And so it plays a part in how you're interacting with your colleagues and the systems that you're trying to build out. So that's the only sort of thought that I had as we're thinking through how this relates to the workplace.
Dani, yeah, so that's actually perfect to kind of segue into the next question here, is because I did want to ask you, you know, for a lot of people that hold multiple marginalized like identities, it can sometimes feel very overwhelming to explore the different layers of those conversations, but with others, especially those who lived different experiences than our own, right? So in your opinion, how can somebody begin to open up more of these conversations with others? What is a good way that maybe you suggest to having those conversations? Because a lot of them, even like this morning, they are tough conversations and people sometimes don't know how to kind of think about that and how to open up that with people around them.
Sure, and I'll add a couple things and then I'll open up to the rest of the panelists. I think I'll add to that it's taxing emotionally and spiritually. Chances are, if someone who is at the intersection of multiple identities, you've navigated some form of trauma, microaggressions, invalidations, exclusions. You've been in conversations where you're not believed, you're not heard. So I'd like to flip that and say the onus is not on people who have been marginalized or minoritized. It's on those with perceived dominant or privileged identities to leverage their voices and their privilege to create then the space for people to show up authentically. I think oftentimes we do put the onus on people at the margin, right, or who have been marginalized, to show up, and we have been, and there are people who are willing to do that work, right? I do that work. This is why I'm in education, and I've leveraged the opportunity and the privilege that I have to be known authentically and to have a job and to have that sort of security, right? So I've navigated that, but not everybody's going to want to be in that position. So I think the first thing that comes to mind is when we think about like diversity, equity, and inclusion committees, right? And like who is being invited to those committees, who's doing the legwork. So I think we first have to make it safe for people to show up authentically and tell the truth. And that means having a critical, honest reflection on your identities, on your story, on who you are, your positionality, and then listening to the stories of people who have been traditionally, historically marginalized and believing us. So I feel like if you're someone in a position, whether it's an ERG, you're at a committee, you facilitate these trainings, and you are someone with multiple marginalized identities, I think it's having grace and space for yourself to be human and to not be the expert, and to know that what you're feeling is valid, and to be okay with sort of holding people accountable as an act of love, as an act of I got your back, not as an act of like shame and blame, which is going to often shut down the conversation. So I think that was a long answer, but some of the things that kind of come to mind as we think about who do we often place the onus on having these conversations and creating the sense of safety. That's all I got.
Erica, Mark, did you have anything to add to that as well?
For myself, or Eric, did you want? Oh, okay. So as a white person, can't really comment much because I'm still figuring out and analyzing what we understand and how to make things, better. And I don't know. Yes, being a deaf person, I do understand, and it is parallel with that experience, but it's also shared experience. It's a little bit different. If you're white or if you're black, it's different experiences for everybody. But I do notice and recognize that there's more black deaf people also. So that will help me connect or help us connect to understand. For example, I've experienced with police shootings with black people, and before, if there's a black deaf person, I'm not really sure if we understand enough, but it's when I have a good friend who's black and who's deaf, and we've had conversations about being able to sign and talk, and if a police officer sees him signing, they'll probably shoot him, right? You have to understand that how can we connect? We need to be able to connect sign to be able to identify what is a sign versus what is a threat. It depends on the situation. So meaning that if I use my own privilege to help somebody in a situation, not really help, but like collaborate, have a partnership together to explain to the police department or police officers, it's not it's we stop all those barriers. It's not a barrier. It's our sign language. It's how we speak. It's our language. So it's really still a learning process. We have to do more educating and have more discussions to really be able to help this to have a better understanding.
Thank you, Mark. And I know, Eric, were you going to add something there too?
I think the only thing, and Mark and Dani spoke to this a little bit, it's about, because we're talking about intersectionality, I think it's really important to say, because we have these smaller amounts of privilege mixed in with, aspects of oppression, right? Like I'm a man, but I'm also Black. Like that's the part. I have a level of privilege to help out certain people in given situations. And in other situations, they have a position to help me out. So, you know, all of these things become environmental or situational, given the context of what level or what I should be trying to do in order to help make sure that somebody does feel validated when something happens or when something is out of place, to make sure that that's called out and accounted for. Given an example, in a past place that I worked in, an Asian American woman that I work with, a really good colleague and friend of mine, was in a situation in a meeting and just was not being heard at all. And then in those situations, I'm calling out, I'm like, hey guys, solution that we just say it all works. And she said that like 5 minutes ago. And it's very simple things like that. That's not like huge. That's not something to be clapped for, but that's something that's important to consistently do in order to make sure that people are validated in our workplace situations and in any other professional situation that we may find ourselves in. Because in that situation, her identity as a woman was being oppressed, and my identity as a man was being inflated, regardless of the fact that I was a Black man in that situation. I'm in a tech company, people just validate, they were all of different minorities as well. So my Blackness was downplayed and me being a man was upplayed. And me understanding in that situation, in that context, this is a situation now where I need to help this person be validated in the oppression that they're feeling. So, you know, I don't think every single display of helping someone is this big, you know, open, like, hey guys, we need to come together and do X. Like, it really is those small situations where you consistently validate people's lived experiences and the fact that they're unable to show up and experience things in the exact same way that you are. I think that's the only thing that I wanted to add. I think that's important.
I think that's great, Eric, too. And I think a lot of times it's the things you do behind closed doors, or when you're not expected to do them, or when everybody's watching, that those actually sometimes are more important and I think more meaningful, because I think they're more genuine. So I do give you, yes, like you said, I know it doesn't need a round of applause, but you've got one from me. So so thank you. So next question here. This is a question I'll ask for anybody that would like to answer. I had this addressed originally to Kyle, was so, you know, this morning we're having a conversation, right? We're opening up these difficult conversations, and conversations are important, but it's obviously not the end, the beginning or the end of these unconscious biases, misrepresentation of different people and different groups. So what are some ways that the larger community can actually support these underrepresented voices? Like, can you give us some examples of, like, if you actually did this, this would actually help? Like, what are some things that we can do?
I'll add, and I'll open up the floor. I think Eric's example was one of the ways that you can start to sort of shift that, right? It's those small, big things. It's creating space. It's elevating and uplifting people. I think it's also, it can look like asking yourself in all these different points, whether you're in community, whether you're at work, whether you're building out a curriculum, whether you're looking at your hiring practices, it's examining and addressing and asking yourself, who is excluded, who is centered, who is perhaps being unintentionally excluded here through our language, their choice of words, through, you know, where we're doing this job posting, through asking for 10 years of experience. Right? What are some of those ways that we're unintentionally excluding folks and continue to marginalize people that have historically been marginalized? So I think it's that constant state of self-reflection and asking ourselves, who is being centered, who is this for, whose story am I telling, who's being perceived as the hero, who's being perceived as the person needing help, or, you know, the villain. Like, it's that, I think it doesn't have to be so complicated. I think what scares us, or what has us stop, is this, like, it seems larger than us, when if we start small and we start by reflection, having those reflections and asking ourselves those sort of tough questions, we'll realize, well, who's not at the table? Who needs to create this table? Do we need to do away with the table in the first place, right? Like, so those kinds of sort of questions that have people sort of come in and feel validated and feel like they belong. I think that's a step in the right direction, right? And that's 1-2 things out of the many things that we can start doing.
Thank you, Dani. And I saw, Mark, were you gonna add something there?
Yeah, so really right now, with this panel is one example of what we can do, is making events more inclusive and having host different kinds of events more often. Not just once a month or once a year, but more often. So I compare my experience from growing up to now, and I compare the two, and I see more events now and that are recognizing diversity and, you know, Black History Month and LGBTQ and all of the things that are showing diversity that are popping up more often. And I think that helps. It helps improve it a lot to be able to recognize and become more aware, and giving opportunities to be able to share our experiences and tell our stories and share and educate people about these topics. Yeah, I think this is a great start.
I appreciate those comments from all of you. And I know just personally, as you guys were talking too, I was, I started doing this years ago. It was a comment that somebody made to me, but, talking about the privilege that individual people have. And that if, for instance, for me, there's some people that go and they buy a Starbucks every morning or something, right? Okay, yes, it's only $5 or $6. But if there's something that we really believe in, or a group of people that we really want to support, maybe don't get a coffee that day. Maybe donate that to that favorite organization. A lot of times people think you have to donate $200 or make some big, investment. Is that even if it's just $5, don't get a coffee that day. So that's something that somebody told me years ago. So I always think about that. So, and again, I'm not rich. So I just make these little $5, $10, $20 here and there where I can, when it's something that I really believe in. So I just thought of that as you guys were talking, even if it's, again, those small things that you do, that again, maybe nobody is seeing, maybe it's not on a big stage, but that it's important to the organization and the community of people that you're trying to support as well. There was a good question that came through chat, so I'm going to ask this of the panel. Marcelo asked, how can we help the South Florida tech organizations identifying their positionality gaps in improving diversity in their tech teams?
Well, I'm happy to answer that. Marcelo is wonderful. It's a wonderful question, and I've learned a lot from him. And so the way to identify all of the different positions, excuse me, is positionality to be able to recognize is to, let me explain this a little bit, what that means. So everyone on the team would get the same questions and have an opportunity to answer. So you could answer, and we could kind of map out all of the answers for these questions, and really would be able to help identify the team itself, instead of just always, not just an individual, but collectively as a team. Because if we recognize that we have a gap, and we could be able to shift that and focus on that specific gap. So for an example, if we have all hearing team, and then you add a deaf person onto the team, that's one way to identify that gap when you're asking all of these questions. So that's just an example, but I don't know if anybody else or have any other ideas for the panelists?
This might be answering more so the last question than the first one, but I think it fits for both. I want to I think we should just normalize feelings more. We like, I really just like, instead of having these huge watershed moments where it's just like, I've been through all this stuff and I just had this hard year, and it's just like, why don't we have regular conversations about how we feel about things, so it's not such a huge moment all at once where things are just kind of like coming out. I think a lot of the times I have conversations with people, they just have pent up things for so long. And it always is a whole bunch of small things. Like microaggressions are real, but you have 1,000 of them across a year, and you're just like, there's so much on my mind, I need to like let it out at this moment. Whereas if I did a conversation, like I currently only have a staff of 3. So this like has to be done across larger organizations in maybe a slightly different way. But if you have a team and you have check-ins with them, you already have check-ins with them that have to do with like work, right? But you can have like a little bit more spaced out, maybe every once a month, or like if it's a lot, like every other week or something to that nature, where we're saying like, how are you doing? Just generally. And having that happen often enough where the person actually feels comfortable to tell you, I'm not doing so great. Like, I'm not having a good time right now. I like the work that I do, but because of XYZ, I'm not feeling my greatest at work. And you would be astonished at how much that affects that person's productivity, the things that they do, the way that they connect with you, the problems that they surface, because they feel more comfortable having a conversation with you. But because we kind of always avoid talking about feelings, it feels like either there needs to be this huge moment or there needs to be no moments at all. And then you have this person who secretly hates everything about their job except the fact that the little skill set that they're practicing in. And that sucks. Like you don't want to get into a company, hope that this is everything that you dreamed of, and then all the people around you, you're just like, they don't get me at all. And it's not so that somebody needs to completely understand you to your core. It's just that they need to be open to having a conversation about some things. Very, very basic things that allow you to be able to navigate the work environment better. That's all.
You
Can
gonna
I
add
just
something
add?
there, Dani?
Yeah,
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
like, yes, to everything
I
you
saw
just
you
said.
come off
Okay,
mute.
I
I
know.
love this too. I'm glad you said that, Eric.
Yes. So, okay. Wow. Let me get my thoughts together. Okay. So at Yes, we have we have what's called like peering meetings, and we do like that human check-in. I do it with our youth programming. We've extended that to the coalitions that we're a part of, and it's just like, but I'll say you have to create the space for people to tell the truth first. So before implementing clearing meetings, human check-ins, whatever, we must make it safe for people to do so. So that means that there has to be that foundational work. So it's just like thinking about, we want more diversity. Well, diversity, you got to be ready for diversity, right? You got to create the space so that diversity stays. And so I think that is one, I think just to expand on what Eric shared, is to create the space, the psychological safety, and the validation that's needed in tandem with that.
I love that. Thank you so much, Eric and Dani, for those comments there, because I think that was an important, part of the discussion to bring up, Eric. And just in my Q&A questions here, I'm actually going to skip a couple because we did have a question that kind of, ties into this. And actually, I'm reading in the chat here also. I think you just sparked, what is this? Marcelo was saying, check-in Tuesdays. So he said a brilliant idea, inclusion check-in Tuesdays. And then let's see, talking about feelings more 100%, Michelle says, we are humans, not just company assets. So I love that as well. So you're getting a lot of good positivity in the chat right now. So the question that I did want to bring up here along these lines was, so being part of an underrepresented group can often create feelings of not belonging, right? So not belonging in the larger community, but then not belonging even in your own community groups. Like you were saying, is you can have somebody that's deaf, Black, Muslim, so on, and they have that intersectionality that maybe even within one of those groups, they don't belong, right? So I wanted to talk a little bit about, to your comments there, Eric, was how can these compounding intersectionalities of being parts of multiple and underrepresented communities, how can that actually affect our mental health? I think mental health, again, like you were saying, is they're not talked about enough. I think mental health goes along with feelings and being able to get that out and talk and connect with somebody. So I'm just wondering, do any of you here have just some comments or insight onto how that actually affects us in the mental health realm?
I'll just say real quick. Oh, Mark, did you want? Oh, okay. I'll go really quickly because I don't have a huge thesis on it, but the isolation is difficult. When you are in a perceived group, I actually had some conversations about this. South Florida, when you're not from South Florida, you think that all Latin people are the same. Like you don't take the time. Like it's really bad. Like especially like my colleagues that I have from Chicago, like a lot of people just think everybody's the same if you are of Latin descent of any kind. So when you're having kind of conversations about, you know, different groups, every group seems like a monolith until you're in it. So I know that Black people are like very akin to that. I have friends in different groups. They're like, oh, I have a different sexual orientation, and the people I firmly identify me as being this particular type of way, and I can't do that. Like, are we all Cubans? Yes. Like that's all. Literally, thank you, Marcel. Like that's all people like align with, and I think until you start to have those conversations, you realize how isolating it is to be categorized in a specific group and not fully identify with that group in its entirety. Like not having to have the agency to say like, yes, I'm Black, but I'm these things as well, and these things make me different from others. Like having my own identity, that's not a, it's difficult to have that conversation in a way that is accepting of people because we immediately label and categorize people. So you start having this disassociation with who you feel like you should be. Am I this enough? Am I Black enough? Am I this enough? And then am I who I would like to be, and how I represent myself and the things that I like and appreciate about myself. And that disassociation, it goes back to my key word of this answer. It's like isolation. I just feel isolated in having that. But I think that's kind of my thought on it, and I love to hear what the other panels have to say about that.
Mark, were you going to add something? Oh, okay, there you go.
Yes. Okay. So I just want to add quickly. What Eric had said, his comment, being able to recognize the parallel experiences, being a deaf person myself, and my experiences, I've experienced making, make the big picture, making it easy. So I grew up in a very small town, and I was the only deaf person in this entire town. So they had about 15,000 people in this town, in this community, and I was the only deaf person there. So that means that it's good for comparing to the world, right, in this small town. So the world that we has deaf people who sign, and maybe the population of deaf people, meaning that every day we need to be aware. My experience with the hearing world is that everyone it talks, and nobody hardly use captions. There's not a lot of signing happening in the world, right? Yes, I do get tired, right? I get tired of the experience every single day of trying to work with the hearing world and how it all works. So the world itself is just, they definitely have biases, and some, of course, I do wish that the world itself would stop seeing themselves in one way and make the switch a little bit to be able to help, and the focus a little bit more on being able to have a different way to include the deaf people in the community so that they can enjoy without having to always ask, always for an accommodation. For example, if I want to be able to enjoy going to an event, you know, just stop having me ask all the time for an interpreter again and again. Like, just do it. Just have it prepared and be there. So because it's very tiring, but I don't really, you know, have the perfect answer or the perfect solution. But I do know that if we make it a safe place, then we can make inclusion more accessible without the ask. So yeah, it's my thought.
Thank you, Mark. And we're actually right at time right now. So I don't know if you were going to add something there, Dani, but I did want to give you a chance. No, okay, you're good. So just wanted to say thank you again for everybody that came, you know, bright and early this morning, to all the panelists, Mark, Eric, and Dani. This was a great discussion. I think every time we have a good discussion, and there's a lot of these hard questions going on, I feel like I want a whole nother hour. So we definitely have to have a part 2 of this one. But again, thank you guys so much. And I know I've learned a lot. I think there was a lot of really great comments and some quotes probably throughout the weekend in chat that I might be using again here, that I might steal from some of you. So thank you again. And hopefully everybody has a wonderful rest of your week, and that we'll see you guys all soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.